This video was brought to you by our brand new channel, TLDR Business. Subscribe by clicking the link in the description. As you probably noticed, Europe is currently suffering through an unprecedented inflationary crisis. In July, year-on-year inflation in the Eurozone hit a 25-year high of 8.9%, driven by a 39.7% surge in energy prices. However, not everyone is suffering equally. Consumer inflation in France, for example, is sitting at 6.8%, while consumer inflation in the Baltic states is uniformly above 20%. So in this video, we're going to try and explain why inflation rates are varying between European countries, why Spain has it worse than Germany, why Hungary has it worse than Poland, and why France, well, have it better than anyone else. So, in this video, we're going to focus on the three things that contribute to intra-European inflation variation: the different ways that countries measure inflation, countries' varying degree of reliance on certain energy sources, especially Russian gas imports, and the different support measures implemented by national governments. Now, we should say that a lot of academic work has been done to try and figure out why inflation affects some countries worse than others. And as such, political scientists have found statistically significant relationships between a country's vulnerability to inflation and a whole load of other things, including the independence of their central bank, their tax system, and even the country's inflationary history. We mention this because we want to make clear that the factors we're going to focus on in this video don't totally explain the inflation differences between various European countries, because if we went through all of them, well, it could take a while. Anyway, caveats aside, let's get to our three main reasons, with the first one being differences between how countries measure inflation rates. Now, a country's consumer inflation rate is supposed to tell you how much the average household bill has increased by over the last year. But because the average household in one country will spend its money on different things to the average household in another, their inflation rates will be different even if both countries see an identical rise in the price of specific goods. To illustrate this point, let's imagine that your average household in country A spends 50% of their income on food and fuel, the two things which are driving Europe's current inflation shock at the moment, while your average household in country B spends only 20% of their income on food and fuel. So, if over the course of a year, food and fuel prices jumped by 10% and the price of all other goods stayed constant, inflation in country A would be 5%, while inflation in country B would be 2%. And that's sort of what's happened in Europe. The Baltic states do spend more than their European counterparts on food and fuel, which is partly why their headline inflation figure is just higher than other nations. The average Latvian household, for example, spends 25.9% of their income on food and 16.3% on energy and housing bills. By contrast, though, your average Irish household spends just 12% of their income on food and 13.8% on bills, which partly explains why consumer inflation in Ireland is half that of Latvia. Anyway, that's not the only reason. Another factor is countries' varying reliance on certain energy sources. Now, while energy prices have gone up across the board, the current inflationary crisis is being driven by natural gas. Oil prices, for example, have recently stabilized at about $100 per barrel, which is about double their pre-COVID average, but it's not as big a jump as European gas prices, which have absolutely skyrocketed and are now sitting at 275 euros per megawatt hour, 20 times their pre-COVID average. Now, this is clearly particularly bad news for countries who are reliant on gas, and even worse news for countries that rely on pipeline gas from Russia, who have experienced disruption to their supplies, and often lack the infrastructure to replace these shortfalls with liquefied natural gas, otherwise known as LNG. Germany, for example, relied on Russian pipelines for a majority of their gas imports, and they don't have any domestic LNG terminals. So, unsurprisingly, their newfound intention to wean themselves off Russian gas and the recent disruption to Nord Stream 1 has left Germany scrambling to build LNG terminals, which is one of the reasons why Germany's inflation rate is higher than, say, France. Unfortunately for us, Eurostat includes energy bills as part of housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuels when measuring inflation. So it's hard to gauge how much is down to Germany's gas woes. But it's safe to say that Germany has seen a significant bump in housing and energy bills when compared to France. Similarly, the Baltic states relied heavily on Russia for their natural gas pre-war. Unsurprisingly, the war has interrupted this though. Lithuania voluntarily stopped importing Russian gas in early April. Estonia has started importing LNG, and Russia cut gas to Latvia in late July. As a result, Estonia has seen a 70% rise in housing and energy bills, while Lithuania and Latvia have seen a 50% rise. The final factor worth covering is how much each national government has intervened in order to suppress inflation. That's because some European governments have been significantly more generous than others in this regard. The biggest spenders in absolute terms have been Germany, Italy, and France, who have spent 60, 50, and 45 billion euros respectively to limit the impacts of inflation. For context, the UK's current support package comes in at only £24 billion, or about 29 billion euros. The biggest spenders in relative terms, though, have been Greece, Lithuania, and again, Italy. Now, Italy's generous support spending, amounting to 2.8% of GDP, might explain why Italy's year-on-year inflation has begun to fall, and why it's lower than, say, Denmark, who announced basically zero support for consumers. However, it's not just about how much each government spends, it's also about what they spend it on. In July, for example, the French government spent nearly 10 billion euros to fully nationalize the French energy giant EDF, and then limited wholesale energy price increases to 4% annually. Now, this has proved very popular domestically and kept inflation rates down, but it's not something that can easily be replicated in other European countries, because the French government already owned 84% of EDF in the first place. And the plan could become significantly more costly in the future if energy prices continue to rise, and if France's nuclear fleet, which previously did quite a good job of insulating France from international energy prices, continues to suffer outages. Altogether then, those three factors go some way to explain why inflation rates vary so significantly from country to country, and how the interaction of politics, energy, and business can impact economic health. And if you're interested in that sort of thing, then you should check out our new channel. Just take a look at this. Musk, Zuckerberg, Gates, Cook, Bezos, Buffett. These are some of the most powerful and influential people in the world right now. Mark Zuckerberg is an unelected, all-powerful leader whose ability to reach billions every day literally cannot be reined in. Tim Cook runs a company which has a market cap higher than all but 7 countries' GDP, and more cash on hand than the US government. Jeff Bezos controversially employs an absolute army of staff. In fact, an army of staff bigger than the US, British, Canadian, and New Zealand armies combined. And Elon, well, he's busy playing fast and loose with the very system of commerce and stock exchange right now. And saying that isn't going to win me any subscribers from Elon fans, but it's true. These leaders, these businesses, wield immense weight in our world, and yet are often treated as abstract figures shuffling money around, as heroes and business deities, or as criminal devils. In my world, though, things are never that cut and dry. I've been running a series of politics YouTube channels for about 5 years now, so I know a thing or two about powerful people and the deals they do to maintain that power and get things done. And to be honest, these people are often more powerful than the leaders who win the elections and political battles that I normally cover day to day. So let's take a look at the politics and power of business. Let's not allow our eyes to glaze over when the spreadsheets get dense. Let's not be distracted by flashy products or fancy sales pitches. Let's examine these businesses for what they really are. Let's look at the politics of business and how these people and companies change our world. And if that sounds good to you, then hit subscribe and take a look at TLDR Business. Now, our first two videos are already live on the channel, discussing the secret economics of porn and how Netflix's actions in the streaming wars might explain why they're struggling at the moment. You can check out both videos using the link below, and be sure to subscribe for more from TLDR. Thanks for your support.